Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. I have with me George. You got to give me the pronunciation on your last name, or I'm going to butcher it.
All right. So there's two accepted pronunciations in the family. One's Kutnerian, one's Kutnerian. I go with Kutnerian.
Kutnerian. Okay.
Kutnerian. Yes.
Huh?
Kutnerian.
Kutnerian.
It's okay. Close enough.
Okay. I'm going to call you George. How about that? But before we get started, this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Jada, who produces, is laughing at us in the background. That was something I should have asked you about before we got started. And normally it would be something that they go in and cut off and send off or put in the bloopers. But here we are. We're live. We're real. George, I am really excited about talking to you today. You're doing small homes. I've been a big fan of small homes way early in my career, decades ago. I actually ran some small homes. My mom lived in one until she passed away. My stepfather, her husband, is in another one right now. Something I've talked about a lot. And so let's start with a little bit about who you are, what you do, how you're changing the world for older people.
Yeah. So George Kutnerian, co-founder, president, CEO of Wellpointe. We operate affordable boutique-style residential assisted living homes in California. We operate 67 locations across Fresno, Los Angeles, Irvine, and Mission Viejo. And so really, fundamentally, the 30,000-foot mission level, we're really trying to democratize access to housing and care. We know there's a big affordability problem. We believe this model is a great model to help solve that. The affordability piece, but also provide the type of care that I think people want as they're aging. And really one of the things we also do is provide kind of a concierge style care coordination model as well. So we're trying to add value by kind of going beyond just the hands-on care. The hands-on care is really important, but I think in this day and age, consumers are expecting more. And so we're trying to do it all. It's not easy, but we're trying to disrupt that traditional cost quality trade-off. And I think that's what's really disruptive about our model and has enabled us to grow as quickly as we have.
So I want to dig deeper into this, because I know that's what my audience is going to be most interested in. But I think we need a little bit more context. How did you get into this business? How did you get the idea of doing this? I mean, and to set the stage in California, particularly for those who are outside the state, California has a huge number of residential care, something like 8,500, 9,000 homes. Not all of those are for the elderly, but a huge number. I think by far and away the biggest, even as a percentage of any place in the United States. But I'd love to hear sort of your founder story, your origin story to start with.
So like you mentioned that decades ago, like you've had experience with this. So my story is through my parents. So my parents actually opened up their first home that was of this model in 1984. And so to kind of put that in context, I was born in 83. So, 1 year after I was born, mom and dad got into this. I have a younger sister who's 5 years my junior. Her name's Angela. And we kind of had a front row seat to mom and dad doing this. And it was very, very nascent, back then. I think it was only maybe in 1980 or so when the state changed the zoning at the state level to allow for these communities as of right, which is, I think, one of the huge enablers. And so this was a lifestyle, business, entrepreneurship for them, but there was passion behind it, because we're of Armenian background, culturally, you don't put your loved ones in a facility. That's not acceptable. So, you want an environment that you would feel comfortable putting your loved one in that's, hopefully acceptable also to your culture. And so, they did that, got it to like 6 locations. I did a stint after undergrad at Cal Berkeley. I did a stint there with them as an employee working alongside them. Then I went to grad school, went to Columbia, did a master's in real estate, then beelined it from there to the University of Chicago, where I went to business school. And then at the same time, my sister was doing her master's in gerontology and health administration at USC. So we're both, and during this time, like I used graduate school to really kind of refine my ideas about the model, how to grow the model so that it's not just this mom and pop small thing that can't be scaled, because that's always been the knock from the capital side of things. And so we came back together it was around 2013, just as, employees working alongside our parents, more than doubled what they had done. Then in about 2021, they transitioned out into retirement. We kind of completely reorganized the business as Wellpointe with micro brands under there. And then really started building a team. So everything kind of changed in about 2021, where we kind of went from a lifestyle thing that was just a family operation to now what is kind of a growth story. So that's kind of, the high level, a lot of bumps and curves around, along the way, but that's the Reader's Digest version.
Well, and I'll tell you what I love about this story, George, is that so many things. So in some sense, the capital raising is probably harder because it's smaller, but it's probably easier because it's smaller as well. And you have a lot more control. Most people coming out of B school are going to look at that and say, oh man, I want to go do something massive. And so you've taken a very different approach, except that what you have now is really kind of massive, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a great story.
We're at the point where, like, if we wanted to organizationally, do the more traditional model, we certainly could. This is really for us a high conviction model, something that we really believe in. So instead of us deviating from it, moving away from it, we're very much leaning into it. And that was part of what I used grad school for, and kind of experimenting, thinking about the idea, refining it. How do you scale it? And yes, capital has been a big challenge, but we've made, since 2021, we made a lot of headway where folks are understanding it more. And I think now the model is finally, getting some attention on the national stage. People say, well, how do you come up with the idea? We didn't come up with it. I mean, some people point to the greenhouse model, which is a great model to look at, that's based in this, but this model predates even that. Like I said, my parents' first one in 84. There were some of these before that as well. So this is really about how the model's evolved, and then how is it evolving with the consumer preferences and needs, and how are we scaling the model so we can actually touch more lives? I think that's what's really interesting to us.
Yeah. So I guess the if I'm an operator of a big sort of big box senior living, and I'm watching this and I'm thinking, yeah, maybe I understand the boutique that Steve Moran has talked about, where his stepfather is, and it's well over $10,000 a month, and that's a lot of money. But you're tackling the sort of the low income, the affordability. I mean, how do you make that work and pay staff? And talk to me, how does it work in real life?
Yeah, I think when people talk about affordability, unfortunately, they usually talk about only kind of one lever at a time. And really affordability, you have to bring a lot of different things together. And so there's a few things. One is the real estate model. And so, using, I think, single family homes, certainly in certain markets, has a cost advantage to it relative to bigger box. And so there's that. So when you have the real estate side, you can create some efficiencies there in terms of cost basis. Then there's the staffing side. So the staffing side is a really interesting one, because most, traditional mainstream communities have a very departmental approach. You have direct care staff, then you have staff separately that handle medication management. You may have culinary or dietary staff, housekeeping, and these are all different departments. And then you probably have someone on top of that who's like a manager of that department. So all of a sudden, all that adds up. In our model, we have more of a holistic caregiver model because we have a smaller footprint. Okay. Our location on average, when we're done with our kind of adaptive reuse process, is about 2,500 square feet. That's from purchasing a home that's about 1,800 square feet. But that's still a relatively, small footprint. So you have this holistic kind of staff that do the direct care, do med management. They're trained in all those things. They do the housekeeping, the laundry, and all that stuff. And then this way you can actually have more staff, which is the kind of the paradoxical part, more staff, but they're not siloed. And so I think that's more high touch care, but we also gain cost efficiencies from that. And then the final piece is the revenue model. So we have been kind of a leader in home and community-based services waiver programs. And so in California, in California, we call Medicaid Medi-Cal, because in California, we like to brand everything.
Yeah.
But we very much have leaned into Medi-Cal and waiver programs to basically make this more accessible than it otherwise would be. So you combine these different levers together, and that's how you can actually accomplish affordability. It's seldom one silver bullet, Steve. It's not one thing.
Got it. Now, you also use sort of a neighborhood concept, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So part of what makes the model work operationally is co-location. And that's something that I think we've done better than a lot of our peers. It takes a lot of discipline. But like in Fresno, for example, which I would say is the holy grail case study, is we have 42 locations in 2 square blocks. And so when you do that, you have operational efficiencies when it comes to like maintenance and property management, food service distribution, even care oversight. And so, because if you have like supervisory people who are going to help oversee things, they can get from location to location more easily. So in a way, it kind of operates like a larger community, but the feel of it is more intimate and boutique. So we're kind of getting the best of both worlds. And I think that's where, again, a lot of the disruption is coming, where it's like all of a sudden this model that everyone viewed as mom and pop and not scalable, actually we're proving that it is scalable, but we're getting the benefits of scale, but the kind of the intimacy and the kind of that boutique feel from the smallness.
Okay, and do you take private pay as well?
We do. We do. But our model, like we've really leaned into Medi-Cal waivers, but we do take private pay. And then some people come in as private pay and then they transition. I think, Steve, there's a misconception about Medicaid in general, that Medicaid is for, I hate to say people who are poor, quote unquote,
Right.
When you look at like older adults and you look at like how Medicaid is also structured, for example, in California, it's a program that's a lot more like income focused and not asset focused. Like you can have a decent amount of assets and actually qualify. In fact, your personal home doesn't even count towards the asset limit. So, and older adults by and large are on fixed incomes. And so Medi-Cal actually, and we saw through ACA expansion over the years and stuff. And, some of that's, a lot of there's stuff at risk now, a lot of things have changed, and there's some headwinds there. But, the Medicaid population has expanded. And this is less also political, Republican or Democrat issue, parties aside, like everyone's in favor of Medicaid because we know we need it.
So I love this so much. Talk to me a little. I want to dig a little deeper into staffing, and this is particularly staffing ratios. One of the reasons that a small home model works for my stepfather Gary is they have during the day sometimes 3 people on staff for six people. You probably are not staffed quite that heavily because of the difference in revenue models, but it means that they've got like a 2-to-1 ratio for a good chunk of the day. And you have like 1-to-4, something like 4-to-1, something like that.
No, we have 2 most of the time as well, actually. And so the interesting thing about the model though is bare bones, like out of the box. So in California is a little interesting compared to some other states. There aren't explicit staffing ratios. You're required to have adequate staffing at all times. So it's a little bit subjective, but the thing about our model is the consumer knows out of the box, you're going to have 1 to 6 at a minimum because our communities have 6 residents, which is a California thing based on the state law. Right. and the zoning. And so that at a minimum, that you're getting that. But many of the communities, including ours, go beyond that. And so to your point, many communities are operating most of the time at 2 to 6. And so if you compare that to larger communities, I don't know, you might know better than me. I don't know if it's 1 to 12, 1 to 15, whatever it may be, I believe we have that's where the higher touch comes in. And I think some of that is we're able to accomplish that, I believe, in part because of the smaller footprint. The smaller footprint of the home makes it easier to have high touch care, makes it easier to have line of sight. Okay. You're able to see the resident. You're able to hear the resident. Okay. These are basic supervision principles, but a lot of people take for granted and don't think about. But can you see the resident? Can you hear the resident? And in a home, you're more likely to be able to do that.
So I love this so much. My mom had a massive stroke, and it took 80% of who she was. So she just sort of sit in bed and watch TV, or even not watch TV, and it didn't seem to matter. And so she didn't actually need a lot of attention, but she needed somebody who could be right there, who could stick their head in 20 times a day and say, Pat, do you need anything? Or just hear if something happened. And it would never be able to happen in a large, the best senior living community. And I find myself wondering, and I'm sure you've thought about this as you worked on this model, is it possible to even do this level of care in a big setting?
I don't know. It's a great question. I mean, it depends, I will say, there's going to be some information coming out in the near future about some different models that we're working on that take some of the principles that we have in the small home and are taking it into kind of a different real estate wrapper that are going to work hopefully in more urban areas. So I'm kind of teasing that a bit without giving away too much. I think what works about our model and what could maybe work in the larger settings is fundamentally, and this is something I'm educating people on, is we are a co-living model. And so co-living, that gets drowned out. People think the assisted living term drowns out co-living. But for us, co-living means residents have private rooms. So that's part of our model. That's a big emphasis for us. We don't like to do shared rooms.
Yeah.
And then there's shared kind of communal spaces that are intimate. And for us, the dining, it's around a table. It's like family style. And then in our case, you even have, even what's unique is the kitchen. The kitchen is accessible. In a large community, it's like a commercial kitchen. A resident's never really going to get access to a commercial kitchen, and you may not want them to. But in our model, we've actually had residents participate with cooking. We've had residents who have dementia who say, hey, I want to fold the laundry, because that's a small task that gives them purpose. I'm not sure that in a large community, can you do fold laundry if you wanted to? I mean, maybe. I'm not saying you can't. I don't know. I'm not as well versed in that environment. But in our environment, those things are very much doable. In fact, recently, and I shared this story at Senior Living 100 in San Diego, we had a resident recently ask if they could do a yard sale in the front yard. And I had never heard that before. And I was like, well, I just had to stop and just think about it for a second because no one asked that before. I'm like, well, why not? It's his home. I mean, if it were my home and I wanted to do a yard sale, I'm going to do a yard sale. So why can't he do a yard? So he did a yard sale. Yeah. So it's not about planned activities. It's about how you live life, who you're living it with. And so to me, in a post-COVID world, it's really social is the new amenity. It's less about planned activities. We have that, but it's really about just day-to-day interactions with people. That's social.
Yeah. So I would say that for my mom, it wasn't really an issue when she was because her mind was so, her cognitive ability was so degraded. But with my stepfather, who's got dementia, the activity thing became a very difficult problem for us. And in fact, he was in a different 6-bed where all they would do is turn the TV on. And basically the caregivers they had there just didn't care. They didn't care, even hardly know how to use the TV. And so how do you make the activities program work?
Yeah, and those are the two areas where I think have been the traditional knocks, on the model from of the mom and pop version of it, where the two areas they got knocked relative to larger communities were the activities and were the food. Okay. And those are the two areas that since 2021, we've made very conscious efforts to invest in those areas and to improve in those areas. And so we're really focused on person-centered care and person-centered living. And so that means different things to different people. And so we try to meet the person where they are when it comes to activity. So that could be, doing a crossword puzzle. That could be, a jigsaw puzzle. That could be art. We do virtual tours of museums. There's different things like that, and we're more focused on it. But yes, the kind of the old stigma was like, you're just watching TV all day. And so we've really moved past that. And then with the food too, we've really upped the game with the menu. And basically what we've tried to do is basically say, hey, there's no area that relative to a larger community, our model is deficient. That's really like what we're trying to do. And that's what I believe we've accomplished, where I think, some of the more quote unquote, let's call them maybe mom and pop operators in the space, maybe, they haven't evolved in that area. I think the mistake to make in this space is to just assume that it's all homogenous and that all operators are the same, which would be the same mistake with larger communities, right? To just assume that everyone's the same. That's just not the truth.
Yep. So you have a number of different brands. Any particular reason why you've done that? Do they represent different models of care or geographic, just geographical, or what?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we take what we call a micro brand approach, and so fundamentally we believe that this industry and the service that we're providing is very much rooted at a local level. So I believe that the experiment of a national brand, like a Brookdale, for example, total failed experiment. National brand, it's a failed experiment. Now there are operators who are kind of dabbling with regional brands. I think that's a TBD experiment. I don't think we have a full verdict on that yet, but I fundamentally believe that what we do is local. And so we have local brands. So like Fresno Guest Homes, which is our Fresno brand. I mean, that was the brand that was started by our parents. And so there's a lot of brand equity there. And so we're not going to get rid of that brand. But that brand isn't necessarily transportable or transferable to Los Angeles or Orange County. In Orange County, we acquired a brand called Irvine Cottages that was established by a local gerontologist, PhD gerontologist, who was very prominent in the community. So it made sense to retain that local brand. Why am I going to undo that brand? So we kind of picked up the torch, and of course we've put our spin on everything, but the name ID is still there. So we believe very much in local brands. And to take that one step farther, our approach is, we have over 400 units now, but in 67 locations, but we're concentrated in a small number of markets. We're not in a bunch of markets. That's in a lot of ways intentional. We believe in having a deep presence in every market as opposed to a shallow presence in more markets. So as an example, if you told me, Steve, George, Wellpointe has a choice between having 120 units in one geographic market versus 60 units in two geographic markets, I would tell you, Steve, I'll take 120 units in one market every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
Yep. Okay. So
that's our belief.
Okay. No, it makes a lot of sense to me. And, the other thing is if you look at the funeral home industry, probably something like 70 or 80% of all the funeral homes in the country are owned by about 2 or 3 big corporations. but every single one of them retains their local ownership name. And if you were to walk in and go through the experience, I mean, it's not like they're keeping it a secret, they're hiding it so you couldn't find it out, but they make it as very local like that. So it makes a lot of sense. I want to shift to technology a bit. I actually just wrote an article yesterday that I've submitted for publication that I think I'll talk about in a minute. But I'd love to have you talk a little bit about some of the technology work you've done, because what you're doing is very different. It doesn't, that nobody's hardly anybody's building technology for the residential model, right?
No one is explicitly building for our model. That's exactly right. It's really funny. So I'll tell you a quick story that we're, as I mentioned before, we're working on kind of the co-living approach and seeing if we can put it in a different real estate wrapper. And we're working with a really good architectural team on that project. And we flew them into Fresno to our office and toured them of our locations in Fresno. And this is a team that's done mainstream kind of traditional box assisted living. And after the touring said, George, you guys are using more technology than my traditional assisted living clients. And I said, why do you think that is? He's like, because you probably had to make your model work. And he was right. He's right. And so everyone's talking about AI and rightfully so. But for our model, we need to rewind a bit. And so for us, the first revolution was IoT, Internet of Things. And so, when we're talking about access control devices in terms of security for the home, wander management, so that's a core piece of technology, video monitoring, okay, climate control, call buttons, okay. These are all part of, the IoT revolution. So that's one piece of the technological, spine, if you will, to scale the model and to have centralized oversight and visibility into the home. One of the big things the industry has struggled with is the communities in general, whether it's our model or larger, has been a black box, is getting rid of the black box that's around these communities. And so that was one. And the other thing was kind of cloud native software. And so for us on the operational side, those are things like time and attendance system for staff, schedule management software. Imagine 67 small locations having to manage the schedules of that. We have very sophisticated schedule management software. So those are the things that no one came to us, to your point, and said, hey, I got this solution for the residential model, the small home model. We had to go to different industries and find the solutions. And then now we're at a point where we're actually building our own solutions. We have a director of technology that we poached from Nationwide Financial, who's a data engineer and a data scientist. We just hired a software engineer that we poached from NetJets. And so now we're building our own in-house technical capability. And that's all born out of the mindset of we're not waiting for the industry, the vendors, to come to us with what we need. We're going to control our own destiny when it comes to technology.
So you've talked a little bit about a medication system and talk to me a little bit about that, because ties into exactly what I was writing about, I think.
Yeah. So we create a system that internally, so it's called Medication Order Management System. We internally refer to it as MOMS, affectionately refer to it as that. But it leverages AI. And so basically, one of the problems we have in this space, and it's just like, this could be like a whole separate conversation, but the legacy systems in our space, they're not open. They don't have open architecture. They don't have open API. So it's very difficult to get the legacy systems in our space to talk to each other, including in a lot of cases, the EHR systems, which are really the core systems. And so basically, we have a model or a product that we created where a medication order comes into an email inbox. And then we have Anthropic's Claude model. Basically, we extract it out. It's called JSON. We extract it out. We take it into our Amazon Web Services, AWS environment, and then Claude reads it. And so Claude reads the order, and then we have a whole workflow that gets kicked off in terms of saving the order where it needs to get saved, all automated. Order gets entered, and then there's a automated message that goes out to the family member letting them know about this order. It's all hands-free. The messages are pre-drafted in a very personal way, because one of the tricks is like, okay, how do you use technology and scale it, but do it in a compassionate human way, not in a robotic way. And so we spent a lot of time on that too, but it basically does that process end to end, all automated. And because medications are very unwieldy. I mean, if you have residents on average, we have on average, our residents between prescription and over the counter take 20 medications. So, and those medications statuses are not static, they're dynamic. You can have a dosage change, you can have a discontinuation, you can have a new order, and it's our responsibility to manage all of that. And so as you're scaling, how do you do that without great technology?
Right. Well, what I love about it is that you're saving little bits of minutes here and there for your team members, right? Not enough to replace somebody.
15 minutes. 15
I
minutes
am.
is what we're saving.
What's that?
15 minutes an order.
Yeah. So what that means, and this is what I just wrote about, is that if operators were to spend more time thinking, where can I shave 10, 15 minutes off of each caregiver? That's time that instead of work being used to do paperwork can be spent with residents, right? And
Absolutely.
that can make such a massive difference.
And I think that's where a lot of the misunderstanding is, and a lot of the fear around AI is. It's AI versus humans. And I don't view it that way. That's not my viewpoint. I view it with AI with humans together, because the medication processing is very important, has to happen. But there's also other value add things that our staff can be doing, whether it's not just the direct care staff, but our administrative staff as well. Yeah. And so this frees people up to do other work and to do value add work. And the nice thing is there's a lot of accuracy and reliability with the technology if you do it, right. You have to have guardrails, you have to have a human in the loop, all those things that get talked about. But it's a game changer. But I am concerned that the industry is behind, though, when it comes to this stuff. I don't know that the industry is fully understanding how to leverage all this.
Yeah, I got so much more I want to talk about. We're about out of time. I do want to say one thing, as I just came back from the LTC 100 conference in Scottsdale, sort of the sister to the Senior Living 100. And they did a series of very short, I think there were 10-minute presentations, vendor companies with an operator who was using the technology, all AI based. And I saw some really, really cool stuff that frankly feels a lot more advanced than what I'm seeing in sort of the assisted living memory care side, partly because of course, skilled nursing is way more complex in terms of regulations and all those kinds of things that you talk about. But AI, I think, continues to have so much potential. We use it every day, multiple times a day. It makes everything. It's a tool that makes everything better. And you're right, you still got to have that human element in there. The things I wish we had time to talk about, and we're going to have to schedule another time, is I'd like to talk about creating culture for residents, families, and team members. Also love to talk to you a little bit about sort of leadership, and I'd love to talk about doing business with the family dynamics. I think that we actually see it fairly often in senior living, but I think it's a really fascinating conversation. So we'll have to reschedule a second session to walk through those things. And one of these days I'm going to come visit. I would love to see some of your communities.
Love to give you a tour.
You're like 3 hours away, and I do drive to LA usually a couple times a year. So
we'll make it happen.
Anyway, thank you, sir, so very much. Last words.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Thanks for the work that you do. You can check us out at wellpointe.com. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn. Just type in George Kutnerian. You could also check out our company page on LinkedIn. Again, the company is Wellpointe with an E at the end. That gets mistaken a lot, but yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. Thank you very much.